Anybody don't want to hear
Everybody
me speak?
can go to class and they say.
Now's your chance. Boy, no, sorry about that. Good evening. Now that we've gotten the first hiccup out of the way, go ahead and get started with our evening tonight. You know, I've lived here in North Alabama for 3 years, and I still think that Russellville is about 25 minutes from my house. I still think that it's just really close neighbors. But if you're driving from the north side of Florence, you're not going to make it here in 25 minutes if you obey the law. So. I rushed in tonight and put the other guys behind the 8 ball, getting everything together. And I hate that, but I'm glad that we have the chance now to open up our Bibles together for the next few minutes. We've got a great opportunity together, and you've got a great opportunity that I like to remind the folks at Petersville about a lot too. If you open your Bible tonight and you read along in the passages that we study, then you'll get something good to take home. And that don't have anything to do with the speaker. It doesn't matter how good or talented the speaker is or thinks he is. If you open your Bible and you read the words that God has to share with us through His inspired Word, then you're going to get something good to take home. And that certainly fits the description in the book of Proverbs. When we look at the book of Proverbs, there's lots of different ways to come at it and study it. You start looking at the different ways that it's broken up. You start looking at the parallelism. You start looking at the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. And usually, most of us, when we finish looking at those different things, conclude that the book of Proverbs is a really boring book. That's usually where we get, at least that's where I had been for years and years of Bible study and looking. Proverbs is organized in such a way that you just kind of pick one thing out from another, and the verses don't always go together, and they don't follow any kind of flow or narrative. It's not like reading a story. You read about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and you've got this narrative to kind of keep you going and floating along. But Proverbs, it's just like getting a lecture from your old man. It's just like sitting down and having him say, don't forget this, and don't do this, and make sure you do this, and it's just all these bullet lists of ideas, and man, it can be tough to get through the book of Proverbs. The longer I preached, the more I heard people that I respected look up to the book of Proverbs. And I got to thinking, these are some smart people, and they see something in Proverbs that I just don't see. And I want to figure out what that is. And so I started looking at the book of Proverbs. And a couple of years ago at Petersville, we spent an entire year on Sunday night looking at the different ideas in the book of Proverbs. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the Polishing the Pulpit seminar conference. It takes place every year over in Chattanooga. Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, that area. They asked me to come do some lessons, a series of lessons on Proverbs a couple of years ago, and so I did that. And I've spoken at other places about the book of Proverbs. So when Trey told me that we were going to be in Proverbs, I was excited about that. Because what I began to realize is that the book of Proverbs is a lot like the parables that Jesus teaches. Jesus tells a parable, and everybody that's listening there can go home with a really nice, cute story if they want to. A sower went out to sow, and he sowed some seed, and some of it grew and some of it didn't grow, and that's a nice little story. But the people who had ears to hear, the people who were really interested in the message or the point, they would always do what? When Jesus tells a parable, you read later on, they come back to Jesus and they say, Jesus, explain to us what you mean by that. Explain that to us. And Jesus always has a reading between the lines kind of idea. He's always got a secret meaning or purpose. And the wisdom literature wants us to do the same thing. Wisdom literature, you can read through the book of Proverbs and you can get some cute sayings and you can take them home with you. Or you can read between the lines and you can try to understand. And so the book of Proverbs really is wisdom for living. Or, as we're going to try to look at tonight, what I like to call it is inspired common sense. Now, the verse that we start off with is in Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 28. I asked Trey for some direction. I asked him for some specifics. He said, you just take that verse and run with it. I said, thanks a lot, man. That doesn't help me an awful lot. But it's a great passage, and it really gives me an opportunity to talk about what I want to talk about tonight. So I'm glad that he did that. In Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 28, it says, in the path of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. And so what the book of Proverbs is going to do for us is lay out in black and white, in two contrasting and comparing ideas, where we need to go when we get there. Just like Yogi Berra said, and we all know it, when you get to the fork in the road, what? Take it. Well, the way that the author of Proverbs looks at it, it says, look, you're going down the road, and it's going to split into two directions. Now, that's important, because as we'll look at when we get to the end of the lesson, the devil wants to try and tell us that there are countless roads. There are many winding paths and winding roads, and in our postmodern culture today, we're so confused because of all the many different roads ahead of us that it makes it very difficult to choose which way to go. And we get stuck, we get stymied, we get frozen there in place because we're looking at all these different roads. And the book of Proverbs says, no, don't get tricked by that. Don't fall for that. The truth of the matter is, there are really only two roads that you can take. And I want you to be able to identify when you get to that road which one is the good way and which one is the wrong way. So you have to prepare yourself before you get there. Have you ever been driving down the road with somebody and you've got your co-pilot sitting there? And maybe this happened a whole lot more frequently in the days before GPS on your phone and on the little TomTom or Garmin or whatever. But your friend is reading the map. Y'all are going somewhere. Neither one of you have ever been before. And so it's up to your co-pilot to give you directions. And you're on Interstate 65 and you're running up into Nashville, Tennessee. Now there are 75 lanes on I-65 in Nashville, Tennessee. If you've ever driven there, you know what I'm talking about. And it's 4:45 on a Friday afternoon. So those 75 lanes are just empty. There's nobody on them in Nashville, right? You know better than that. Crowded, traffic, everybody wants to get home. You're driving down and the traffic's moving and you're in this lane over here, and then all of a sudden your co-pilot says, wait, you're supposed to get off at that exit. You ever had that happen to you before? Oh man, that is a bad feeling. Because you just tell everybody in the car, hang on, and you hope that you make it across 3 lanes of traffic as you try to get, because it's too late at that point. You've got to know ahead of time, look, in half a mile, you need to be in the far right lane so that you can get off at the correct exit without causing any problems. That's what Proverbs is wanting to do. Proverbs is wanting to tell you, look, you need to be able to identify where the correct turns are so that you don't get lost. Those two roads are painted for us in an even better way in chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4, and it's all the way through. You know, there's all kinds of verses in Proverbs and the rest of the Bible about the way that we go, the path that we take. There is a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof is death or destruction, you know, things like that. But I want you to notice what it says in Proverbs chapter 4 as we look in verses 11 through 15. Solomon says, I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. Now, I'm going to do something tonight that I don't normally do or recommend. But, and the reason is because at some places I could get in trouble for doing this. I've been here a few times before, and I trust you guys to open your Bibles and read. Because I'm going to read from a translation that's really not a great translation. It's more of an interpretation. And what I mean by that is, the Bible wasn't written in English. It definitely wasn't written in American or Southern. It had to be translated from other languages, and the Old Testament comes to us in Hebrew. And when you translate the Hebrew, you've got two options. You can either take every word in the Hebrew, and you can get the word that it is in English, and you can put those words down, word for word, exactly as they show up. But if you do that, you're not going to be able to understand the verse at all. It's not going to make any sense, because in the Old Testament, they wrote their sentences differently than we write our English sentences. So there's the word for word idea, and so what you have to do is take those words and then you have to make them fit together in an English style. Now there are some translations that take it upon themselves to try and interpret what they think the verse is saying. So if the verse has these words in it, it'll say, okay, that's what those words are, but that's not really what it means. What it really means is this. And that's fine if you are 100% correct in what God intended for that verse to say. But see, if you have a different interpretation of that verse, a different understanding of it, then you're going to be putting words into God's mouth or the author's mouths that they didn't intend. So there are translations out there that go all the way over here, and they just kind of try to paraphrase what the Bible says. You need to be careful for paraphrase translations. But when it comes to wisdom literature, helping us understand that the book of Proverbs is not supposed to be PhD level reading, can be aided if we use one of these paraphrase ideas. You keep your Bible open to Proverbs chapter 4, starting there in verse 11, and you see if this doesn't make sense, if this doesn't add up. It's an interpretation, but it describes the picture for us a little bit clearer, I think. When he says, I'm writing out clear directions to wisdom way. I'm drawing a map to righteous road. I don't want you ending up in blind alleys or wasting time making wrong turns. Hold tight to good advice and don't relax your grip. Guard it well. Your life is at stake. Don't take wicked bypass. Don't so much as set foot on that road. Stay clear of it. Give it a wide berth. Make a detour and be on your way. When it finishes later on in the chapter, you get down and you read verses 18 and 19. And it says, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. But the way of the wicked bypass, as he called it earlier, is like deep darkness, and they do not know over what they stumble. You see, just like we looked at over in Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 28, there is a good road that is well lit and that gets us where we want to go, and then there is a shortcut. There is a bypass. There is a wicked road. I like the way that he describes those for us. He says, don't take one step down wicked bypass. You need to stay completely off of that road, because if you don't, you'll find yourself too far gone and you won't know how to turn your way back, because you'll have gotten confused and gotten lost. And so that's what I want to look at. What Proverbs is really trying to do for us is be very practical. I call the book of Proverbs inspired common sense. We all know people who have great book smarts, right? But when it comes to common sense, they might need help finding a way out of a wet paper bag. The book of Proverbs is really designed to help us understand that, and that's something that we need. We've always needed it in every generation, but nowadays, we even have a word for the difficulty that our generation finds trying to do what we are supposed to do. You can find this word all over the place, all over the internet especially. If you've never heard it, you're going to be introduced. But I think a lot of us are familiar with the term adulting. You can take the word adult and you can turn that into a verb. It's something that you need to do. There's that scary moment that a lot of people think of, that they come to when they when they look around for an adult and then they realize, I am an adult. And so they panic and they look for an older adult, an adultier adult to help us out. We've started using this word adulting like a verb. And this is actually a screenshot from Century 21 Real Estate. This is a real estate website trying to help people after they buy their house for the first time. All right, you're adulting now. You bought your first home. Now, do you remember when you bought your first home many years ago? And that was a scary time. So it says, if you're confused about what to do now, let me give you some keys. And that's really what the book of Proverbs is. Keys to life's lessons. In all the wisdom literature in the Bible, there's a key word to look for. Not just it's in the poetry, but it's in Psalm, it's in Proverbs, it's in Ecclesiastes, and a lot of other wisdom literature. If you really want to get down to what wisdom literature is about, there's a key word that shows up over and over again. It's called better. Say, sure, you can do a lot of things in your life, but it is better if you do it this way. It's fine and dandy if you want to go this road, but it is better to do it this way. And if you are smart, then you will take that advice. Reminded of the interview that a wealthy businessman gave, and during that, the reporter asks, what exactly is it that you ascribe your great success to? How did you become so successful? The businessman looked at him and said, well, I think it basically boils down to the fact that I made a lot of good decisions. The reporter pressed on, said, well, how did you make those good decisions? The businessman thought about it and said, I guess primarily from a lot of experience that I've had. The reporter said, well, one more question. Where'd you get that experience? The businessman said, probably from making a lot of bad decisions. The book of Proverbs is about helping us navigate between the bad decisions to getting to the good decisions. A proverb is a short sentence based on long experience. It's not that complicated. And really, the book of Proverbs is not supposed to be a confusing manual at all. And what I want to do for the next probably 20 minutes is I want to give you a tool for understanding the book of Proverbs that you can use as you read through all of it. You've been in the series for several weeks now, so I'm not sure what else you've covered and what else will be covered, but I want to try to give you something that if you'll pay attention, maybe take a couple of notes or at least jot these ideas down in your mind, then when you read the whole book of Proverbs, wherever you're at, this tool is going to help you as you try to picture what Solomon is doing when he says, go this way, not this way. And I want to do that probably in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense at first, but I want to use a movie, The Jungle Book. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the Jungle Book version that came out last year. It was a live action version with, it looked like it was real, had real actors, and the animals were computer generated, but they looked realistic. If you didn't see that one, then probably maybe you saw the cartoon version Disney came out with several years ago. Really good version. If you didn't see that one, then there was another version that came out in the 60s, and many of us maybe saw at one time or another. If you didn't see any of those movies, the book is by Rudyard Kipling. It's a classic book. He's a good author. So it's not just like watching a normal cartoon. This is a good story. And I think one of the reasons that the Jungle Book is such a good story is because of the lessons that it teaches if you're willing to go under the surface. If you're willing to look at the Jungle Book, it's more than just a pretty story, just like Jesus' parables and just like the book of Proverbs. And here's what I want you to note. Here's what I want to do tonight. If you're not familiar with the story, the Jungle Book is about a little boy who gets lost in the jungle and has to fend for himself. He is raised without parents in the jungle. Now, I want parents to think about a time when you didn't know exactly where your young child was, 5-, 6-year-old child. My mother is a dorm supervisor at Freed-Hardeman University. We love to go up there and visit my mom and dad and spend time on campus. We really love it when it's in the summertime, like now. because she's got this dormitory, Pharaoh Hall, and there's 172 rooms in the dorm, and there's nobody in it. So we go visit my mom and dad, and we kick the kids out in the hallway and say, y'all go play hide and seek. And we see them 3 days later, and it's fantastic. It's wonderful. Maybe not exactly like that, but my kids could tell you how much fun they've had building forts out of mattresses from 15 different rooms and running up and down different places, just having a ball. My dad, their grandfather, taking them around, playing with them. But we were in Henderson, Tennessee a couple of years, probably about 10 years ago. Had to have been longer than that, because it was move-in day. It wasn't during the summer, and it wasn't during the semester. It was when all of the students arrived on campus. Now, in the summer when it's empty, my mom has all the time in the world for her grandkids. But during that day, she didn't have time for anybody or anything, because she's got, 200 kids coming in for the first time, needing to get situated and set up and all this kind of stuff. And in the hustle and bustle of everything going on, my oldest was probably only about 3 or 4 years old at the time, and I didn't know where she was. So I asked my wife, and she didn't know where she was, and we assumed that the grandparents had them, and the grandparents had assumed we had them, and everybody assumed everybody else had her, and lo and behold, she had left the building and was walking down the sidewalk in Henderson, Tennessee. Now, luckily, Henderson's not a big metropolis, but still. Can you imagine my reaction when I walked out? She'd only been gone for 10 minutes. And how panicked I got finding her out in the parking lot with other cars coming and going and people moving, and just a terrible experience. And all of us have had those moments. Could you imagine being a 4, 5, 6-year-old child in the jungle by yourself? That's what the book is about. That's what the story is about. Now, let's be honest. In the real world, how much chance does an infant have of surviving in such a circumstance? It's not going to have a happy ending. But the story gets to unfold for us and paint some pictures. But it's supposed to be extremely frightening for us to think about this small child alone facing all of these dangers. And guess what? That is exactly the mindset that we're supposed to have when we go to the book of Proverbs. When you come to the first chapter of the book of Proverbs, you begin to realize, look, all of this is advice that is addressed to a young person, a young child. This is advice on how to navigate through the jungle out there. It is a jungle out there. And we've got to navigate through pitfalls, and we've got to avoid dangers, and we've got all of these possible ways to get in trouble, and we've got to figure out how to survive. And Solomon says, my son, pretty soon I'm going to turn you loose into this jungle, and I want to give you some tools to help you survive in the jungle. This is the book of Proverbs. It's its own jungle book. How to survive in the wild from a godly perspective. Now, notice this verse in Proverbs chapter 18. Here is the tool that I want to give you. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 1 says, whoever isolates himself, this is English Standard Version, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. If I were going to summarize that very succinctly, it is not good for man to be alone. You think about this Mowgli character. If he had truly been left completely alone and nothing and no one had come along to try and help this infant laying out in the middle of the jungle, that child doesn't have any chance whatsoever of survival, because we can't do it on our own. None of us can. As we get older, we like to be more independent. We like to think that we have more ability to take care of ourselves, and we should be more responsible. But the truth of the matter is that we are greatly influenced by who is around us. So we can't isolate ourselves, because if we do that, we won't make it. We won't survive. So here's the tool that Solomon lays out. Most of us, until you really get into Proverbs, may just pass right over. The first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs are a separate section than chapters 10 to 32, 31. A lot of us don't know that. But if you turn to Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 1, it actually says, now we're starting the book of Proverbs. In chapter 10 and verse 1, it says, here are the Proverbs of Solomon, and then it goes on to talk about them. You see, the first thing that the book of Proverbs does is introduce the whole subject and lay out this tool for us to use as we interpret what we read from chapter 10 to chapter 31. So if you go back to Proverbs chapter 1, you notice at the beginning, he's giving this advice. Proverbs chapter 1, for instance, verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. And then he says, here's who this book is for. This book is designed to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth, to the young person. However, verse 5 also says that the wise can hear and increase in learning, and the ones who understand obtain guidance, so that they can understand a proverb, a saying, the words of the wise, and their riddles. Well, it begins to lay it out. For the first 9 chapters, here's what Solomon does. He says, let me introduce you to a cast of characters. The first 9 chapters, even though there are some bits of advice in them, are actually a series of characters that Solomon wants to introduce his son to identify, here are the good guys and here are the bad guys. He says, if you'll pay attention to my words, what I'm about to tell you right now, for instance, there in verse number 8, hear, my son, your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. If you will listen to what I'm about to give you, it will help you interpret everything that you will come in contact with from this point forward. That's what he's about to do. That's the advice he's about to give. And he's going to do that by introducing his son to some people. And that's what I want to do. And we can do this, what's neat is we can do this using the storyline of the Jungle Book. Because the cast of characters that Solomon introduces in Proverbs 1 through 9 match up almost perfectly with the main characters in the Jungle Book. Let me show you what I mean by that. Of course, these will be pictures from the live-action version that came out last year. So if you've seen it, then you'll recognize. But, Bagheera is this black panther. He's the one that found Mowgli all the way back at the beginning and realized that if somebody doesn't do something for this child, then he doesn't stand a chance. And so he basically adopted Mowgli. He took him under, his wing. That's a phrase, but it doesn't make a lot of sense with a Black Panther. So, think of it another way. But he decided to help raise Mowgli like a father figure. And indeed, the father figure is one of the most important characters in the book of Proverbs. In fact, starting in chapter 2 and going all the way through chapter 10, every chapter starts by saying, son, listen to your father. I want you to turn to chapter 4 and notice what it says as an example. Hear, O son, a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. And then I like what Solomon does here. And think about this. Solomon begins to reminisce. He said, when I was a son with my father, tender and the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live. Now, who is Solomon's father? We're talking about David here. So here is Solomon saying, look, I remember sitting on David's lap. And I remember my father David as king of Israel explaining things to me and giving me advice and wisdom. And when I listened to that, it was very beneficial to me. And that's what you need to do as well. And over and over and over again, the father in the book of Proverbs is listed as someone that is to be respected It is to be paid attention to. So, for one, those who are listening are supposed to say, when it comes to listening to fathers, we're supposed to give heed. But that also has a tremendous responsibility for fathers. Look, we need to be saying things that are worth listening to. We need to be giving sound, good advice along the way as well. But what the father does in the book of Proverbs is point the way directly to this lady. Now, in the Jungle Book, there's a pack of wolves that Bagheera uses to help teach Mowgli right from wrong and to learn how important it is to be a part of a pack. In the book of Proverbs, we are pointed over and over again to Lady Wisdom. The character that we want to be able to identify is wisdom personified. Not just be wise, not just wisdom is a good thing, but she is a good thing. You can find it all the way through chapters 1 through 9, but I want you to turn to chapter 8. Again, I'm just kind of trying to lay out a little bit of the picture for you, just to kind of whet your appetite. If you'll go home and read just the first 9 chapters and try to find these characters, you'll notice more and more material there. I think it'll be really good. She's in chapter 1, she's in chapter 5, but really in chapter 8, we get this personification. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? In the heights beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. And all of chapter 8 is about Lady Wisdom standing up and saying, listen to me. I will help you. I will do what I can to guide you. Down in verse 22, she makes this statement through the inspired words of Solomon. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of His work, the first of His acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before He made the earth and its field, the first of the dust of the ground. When He established the heavens, I was there. When He drew a circle on the face of the deep, when He made firm the skies above, when He established the foundations of the deep, when He assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters might not transgress His command, when He marked out the foundation of the earth, then I was beside Him like a master workman. I was daily His delight, rejoicing before Him always, rejoicing in His uninhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. Wisdom says, I have been here from the beginning, and if you will listen to me, I can help you. We're introduced to more characters as we keep reading the first 9 chapters. One of the characters in the Jungle Book is actually an interesting one. Well, I think my thing might have died. There it is. So here's Baloo. And if you've seen the Jungle Book, Baloo may be one of your favorite characters. Most people say Baloo's one of their favorite. He's this fun-loving bear. He sings about the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. Just this happy, carefree, go-lucky guy. Now, it's almost unfortunate because one of the more popular characters in the Jungle Book is also akin to one of the most popular characters in the book of Proverbs as well. That's the character of the fool. The fool is set up in opposition to all of the good things we're supposed to do. And the fool is called many different things and warned about many different ways. And you know, it kind of boils down to Baloo's attitude at the beginning of when we're first introduced to Baloo in the Jungle Book. He's this really selfish creature. He really only cares about himself. He's a loner. He doesn't want to help the common good. He doesn't want to be there for other people. He's not dependable. He's not trustworthy. He's lazy. All of these things are going on, and he's just out looking for himself and living for himself. And that's a pretty good description of the fool in the book of Proverbs. And what Solomon does in the first 9 chapters is he says, you need to see the fool. You need to be able to identify a foolish person so that you can know that I don't want to follow that guy. Once I identify someone as being in that category, I don't want to go that direction. Now what's great, over the course of the movie, The Jungle Book, Baloo becomes smarter. He changes character. He actually grows. He goes through character development. And that's an important thing, and we need to be doing that. And so Baloo, once he stops being selfish, once he stops being lazy, once he stops only caring about himself, and he starts to contribute and help Mowgli, he becomes a much different character and a very helpful one at that. But as long as he's only thinking about himself, he can't help anybody else. And so that's the fool that we're supposed to avoid, because when the fool gets in trouble, he takes out everybody else with him. He takes down everybody else that's around him. And so the fool is someone to avoid. Now on the next slide, we've got an introduction to the other side of the street. You see, Solomon starts by saying, here are the people to listen to. Here are those whose lights are shining brightly, and you need to follow after them. You need to be aware of one who's foolish, because they're going to go the wrong direction. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to go the wrong way. But then at the same time, there are people you need to run away from at all costs. There's a lot of material here I wish we had time to cover, but we'll start in chapter number 2. Chapter 2. In the movie, Christopher Walken plays King Louie. King Louie is this gigantic orangutan. Huge. He lives in an abandoned temple, and he's got this huge gang of smaller monkeys and chimpanzees that do his bidding. He's a gang leader, is what he is. And he comes up to Mowgli, and he wants Mowgli to help him do one thing. He says, man, I've got everything I need. I got everything I want. I'm the king of this palace. I rule the roost. I got everything I want. All these minions bring me everything I could need. But, I feel empty because I want one more thing. I want to be a man. In the cartoon version, he sings the song, I want to be like you. He says, I want to be a man. I need to take the next step to be a man, and you can help me do that, Mowgli. You can show me, because you're a man cub. You're a human, and you can tell me what I need to do. Well, listen to the description in Proverbs chapter 2. I'm going to start reading in verse number 12. You need to be delivered from the way of evil. In this other interpretation, it talks about taking bad directions. And it says, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, and rejoice in doing evil. They delight in perverseness of evil. Men whose paths are crooked, and who are devious in their ways. Back in chapter, over in chapter 3, in verse 31, it talks about him a little bit more. Do not envy a man of violence. Do not choose any of his ways, for the devious person is an abomination to the Lord. Verse 33, the Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked. In chapter number 6, verses 12 through 19, there's a portrait of the wicked person. And if we had time, we could put a person up here, and we could go through the anatomy and physiology of a wicked person. But he starts in verse 12, and he talks about a wicked person goes about with crooked speech. So there's his mouth. He winks with his eyes and signals with his feet. He points with his finger. His heart is perverted and devises evil continually. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In verses 16 through 19, it talks about the 6 things that the Lord hates. Here is the anatomy and physiology of the wicked. He says you need to stay as far away from this type of person as you possibly can. Immediately following in both of these sections, chapter 2 and again in chapter 6, we have this introduction to the next bad guy or bad girl. Now here was an interesting change. If you saw the cartoon version of Jungle Book a long time ago, there was this big boa constrictor, anaconda, big snake named Ka. And in the cartoon version, the voice sounds really familiar because it's the same voice that does Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is this really evil snake that I always had trouble with as a young child because it sounded, the same. But in the version that came out last year, they didn't use a male for this giant snake. It's Scarlett Johansson, a woman. And that caused like a big deal. That was kind of a big change, a big deal. But in terms of the book of Proverbs, it is perfect. Because not only does Solomon warn his son against the bad guy who's going to run around with his gang of young guys, and they're swift to shed innocent blood, and they're trying to lay traps for people. He says, you got to stay away from this guy. Don't join his gang. Don't follow after him, because they're going to fall in their own trap. He also warns against the seductress. The seductress. The wicked woman. And in the movie Jungle Book, this giant snake has the ability to hypnotize you with its eyes. And it talks in a very soothing way, and it persuades you and convinces you that everything's okay, and to be calm and relaxed and just go with the flow because nothing bad will happen. And then once you've been successfully relaxed and hypnotized, he eats you up. And that's exactly the way that Solomon describes the seductress in chapters 2 and in 6. Chapter 5, for instance, chapter 5, verse 1. My son, be attentive to my wisdom, incline your ear to understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of the forbidden woman drip honey, her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. And again, you need to read these first 9 chapters and see all the other descriptions of these characters and these individuals as it lays it out one after the other. In chapter 9, there is a comparison made between Lady Wisdom and the seductress, the wicked woman. And it parallels them. They both stand on the corner and cry out and say, listen to me and come into my house because I've prepared food. I've prepared something for you that will nourish you. But while Lady Wisdom is offering true food, a healthy, hearty meal, low carbs, lots of fruit, lots of veggies, the seductress is offering junk food. The seductress lays out her table with empty carbs and empty junk, and it's wasteful, and it ends in death. It's taking the shortcut. It's taking the short road. And it says if you do that, then you'll fail. But if you go to where the meal is good, then you'll be nourished, you'll be provided for, and you'll be cared for. Of course, in Jungle Book, we've got the worst of the worst. Shere Khan is the tiger, represents all the wickedness that we have to worry about in the world. I don't have time to talk about the things I wanted to with Shere Khan, but anytime we take a shortcut, anytime we give in to the easy road, the end takes us right to Shere Khan. If we're not prepared to deal with the adversary, then we will be overpowered and defeated. That's kind of the message in Proverbs, is you have to prepare yourself because the enemy is going to come and attack you, and you've got to be ready for it. And here's what I love. Here's what's neat. How does the book of Proverbs end? Proverbs chapter 31, right? The virtuous wife, a good wife, who can find? She's far more valuable than rubies. Now, it didn't happen this way in the live-action version, but how does the cartoon version of the Jungle Book end? You remember? What is it that finally convinces Mowgli to leave the jungle, to leave Baloo, and to leave Bagheera and make his way down to the village? He sees a girl. He decides to follow this girl. And again, there's a whole nother great lesson. There's so much good material in Proverbs about our romantic relationships and how important it is that we get those romantic, intimate relationships right. Because if we go chasing after just the physical things in this life, if we just go chasing after the momentary pleasure, then we're going to wind up causing ourselves bitterness and agony for years and years to come. But Proverbs lays it out and says, but if you'll pay attention and honor the wife of your youth, if you will give honor to things that are lasting and important and significant, then that will make your trip to adulthood. That will help your growing process and becoming the productive, successful adult that you're supposed to be, whether men or women. If you engage in the right types of intimate, romantic relationships, they'll either help you or hurt you in your desire to be the mature person God wants you to be. And that's how Proverbs ends, just as a footnote. So what does it all boil down to? If you pay attention to Proverbs 1 through 9, then you're introduced to these people. And it's a whole lot easier to see people walking across the stage and remember, okay, that's the wicked person, and that's the good person, and that's the fool, and that's the wise father. And I identify those and I recognize those. That's a person that I'm supposed to follow. That's a person that I'm not supposed to follow. Okay, I got all that. That's all good. Here's what happens. When you turn to Proverbs chapter 10 and you start reading these bullet points, do this, don't do this, follow this, don't follow this, look at this, and all of a sudden there's going to be a cast member show up. The fool says in his heart, da-da-da. Oh, wait a minute. I know the fool. I recognize that because I've studied that already. And then it'll talk later about a woman who does this, and you'll be able to immediately identify, well, if the woman does this, then she's a wise woman. She's wisdom, and I'm supposed to follow that. But if she does this, well, then she's a seductress, and I'm not supposed to go that way. And so these bullet point ideas that seem disjointed, suddenly there's a thread that weaves them all together. Who am I going to follow in life? In my life, am I going to choose to follow friends that help me, or am I going to follow that gang of ruthless, immature youths who are just running around like a mob, not doing anybody any good, falling in their own trap? When it comes to the ladies that I have in my life, am I going to listen to wisdom, or am I going to be seduced by the quick and easy way, by the simple flash-in-the-pan passion? Am I going to dig for something deeper? Am I going to be patient and hold on for something better? Am I going to look for wisdom from the right sources, or am I going to fall prey to my enemy because I'm not prepared the way that I should be? This whole cast of characters, and there's more development to be done. But as you identify this cast of characters, then when you walk through the book of Proverbs, and Solomon says, just visualize. A lot of us are visual learners. So just close your eyes and visualize a father walking with his son down the crowded streets of a town. And along the way, the father can pull his son close, and he can point, and he can say, son, look at this situation over here. Now, we've already talked about this individual, haven't we? You can recognize him. He may be wearing different clothes, but that's the fool. Now, how do you know that's the fool? Well, I know that's the fool because he's doing this, this, and this, Dad. That's exactly right, son. And then they walk down the street a little bit more, and the son can point and say, Dad, what about this situation over here? And the father can give him some advice and experience and say, this is what I'm looking for. This is what you're looking at. Now, let me ask you, is that somebody that you think you should follow or not follow? Well, Dad, I shouldn't follow that person. That's exactly right. And so we get this image and idea of walking through the book of Proverbs, and the father can just point along the way. Here's good advice about that. Here's how to spend your money. Here's how to make your money. Here's how to treat your neighbor. Here's how to deal with somebody who's angry all the time. Here's how to deal with somebody who's not treating you the way that they're supposed to. Here's what's going to keep you on the right path. And this over here, this detour, this shortcut, this is wickedness. This is an invitation to problems. Don't go one step down that road. Because the path of the righteous is life. That's where you need to be. Tonight we got an invitation song. What is our invitation song? Why keep Jesus waiting? You know, I love the idea. Jesus is standing. You know, part of me says he's standing down there at the end of the road and he's beckoning to us. But there's another part of me that knows Jesus is walking on the right path and he sees us on the wrong road and he's saying, hey, you're going the wrong way. Hey, come back over here. Come back here to me. Let me show you where you need to be. The righteous path. And Jesus is calling tonight. And you might need to respond to that. The book of Proverbs is inspired common sense. And it starts with following God above all else. If you're doing anything else in your life because it's what you want to do rather than what God wants you to do, you are on the wicked bypass. Because there is a way that seems right to us, but the end is death. I think I can get there if I turn this way. God didn't tell you to turn that way. I know somebody here tonight needs to change what direction they're going. I don't know who it is. But in a group this size, there's at least one person that needs to change their life. If you need to do that publicly, this song is ready for you. We are ready for you. If we can help you in a public way, front pews are left open. Just come let us know how we can help you tonight as together we all stand and sing this song. Jesus waiting
the cold. He will bear you gently to his fold.